I'm 38, and while I've certainly had my share of family drama, nothing quite prepared me for that Christmas. This wasn't just your typical passive-aggressive holiday gathering. It was the kind of night that felt like it was slowly unraveling, thread by thread, and I was stuck right in the middle of it. For context, my name's Elias. I'm the middle child in a family that's, to put it mildly, complicated. My dad, Gerald, is the type of man who wears his pride like armor, yet somehow uses it more often as a weapon than a shield. He's the family patriarch, loud and domineering, always trying to keep everyone in line. Everyone, that is, except my older sister, Mara. She's his favorite, the perfect daughter in his eyes. Accomplished, polished, and always ready to criticize. Anyone who steps out of line, then there's me, the other one, who never quite measured up, always feeling like I was in the way. The years weren't kind to our dynamic. Growing up, I learned to stay quiet, to blend into the background. I did my best to keep the peace, but no matter what I achieved, my dad's approval was like chasing a mirage. Mara, on the other hand, seemed to have everything handed to her, and her attitude only worsened with time. The more successful she became, the more she enjoyed rubbing it in. This Christmas, I debated whether to even go. It had been almost 2 years since I'd last set foot in their house, a big old mansion that felt more like a monument to my father's ego than a warm home. But my nephew Dylan was visiting from out of town, and I really wanted to see him. Kids were the only ones who truly ate, and despite everything, he's the one family member I actually like. I called my dad to see if I was even welcome. Of course, he said I was, but with that clipped tone that let me know he'd be scrutinizing my every move, ready to remind me of my place. When I arrived, the house was adorned in its usual holiday splendor. The massive tree was covered in ornaments I remembered from my childhood, but the genuine warmth was missing. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy, polite smiles barely concealing old grudges and unspoken resentments. Mara was already there, impeccably dressed, making sure everyone knew how perfect her life was. Her husband Simon hovered nearby, laughing a bit too loudly at her jokes. My parents sat at the head of the table, my mother quietly adjusting napkins, and Dad watching the room with that cold, calculating gaze. As I walked in, all eyes suddenly shifted to me. I tried to ignore it. I'd been through this before. I took a deep breath and made my way to the dining room where the others were seated. That's when I felt it, the unmistakable sting of disdain. Dad's eyes landed on me. Then he said it, loud enough for everyone to hear, as if announcing my sentence. "You'll eat in the kitchen, like always." The room fell silent. I glanced at Mara. She smirked, that slow, deliberate smile that said, "See? This is how things are." Then she added, "Guess some things never change." I could feel the weight of every stare, pity, amusement, disgust. It was a scene I knew well, but this time it was worse. I wasn't just an afterthought. I was a joke. I didn't say a word. I didn't argue or beg for a seat at the table. Instead, I smiled quietly, turned, and grabbed my coat from the hall stand. "Enjoy your dinner," I said softly, my voice steady, and walked out the front door. The cold night air hit me like a splash of reality. For a moment, I just stood there, letting it sink in. I wasn't angry anymore, not at that moment. I was tired. Tired of the constant battle to be seen, to be respected in a family that never wanted me. I sent Dylan a quick text to say goodnight, hoping he'd understand why I couldn't stay. I sat in my car, watching the house through the windshield. The laughter and chatter echoed faintly through the windows, but it sounded hollow. Then, about an hour later, my phone buzzed. It was my cousin Henry, the one family member who's always been on my side, though even he had his limits. "Elias," he said, his voice low and shaky. The power just went out at the house. "Everyone's panicking? Is everyone okay?" I asked. "Not exactly. Something's off. Some of the guests... What? They're gone. Just vanished. Gone? What do you mean gone? Like they disappeared into thin air? People are saying it's some kind of stunt, or maybe they got scared and left, but no one knows where half of them are." My heart started pounding. This was beyond anything I had expected. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I'm staying for now. But Elias, you might want to come back. After hanging up with Henry, I sat in my car longer than I probably should have, the cold seeping through the thin fabric of my jacket. My mind was racing. A power outage and disappearing guests. That sounded like something straight out of a thriller movie, not a family Christmas gathering. But knowing my family and the way they operated, I couldn't rule out the possibility that it was another way for them to exert control, or to keep me out of their perfect little bubble. The old house where we were gathered was a labyrinth of grand rooms, dark corridors, and creaky floors, perfect for secrets and hiding things. My father loved to play mind games, and Mara had inherited the worst parts of his character. They both thrived on humiliation and exclusion, and I had been their target for most of my life. But this felt different. The stakes felt higher, the atmosphere darker. After a few minutes, I decided I couldn't just sit here. I grabbed my coat and headed back to the front door. The porch light was flickering, casting uneven shadows against the snow-covered steps. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Inside, the house was plunged into semi-darkness. The emergency lights had kicked in, bathing the rooms in a dim reddish glow. I could hear murmurs and the faint shuffling of feet. As I stepped in, the smell of burnt candles and old wood filled my nostrils. The silence was oppressive. Henry near the staircase, looking shaken but trying to keep his composure. "Thanks for coming back," he said, his voice low. "What's going on in there?" I asked. Henry glanced toward the dining room where shadows danced against the walls. "It's chaos. Oh, Dad's trying to keep control, but people are getting nervous. Some guests left right after the lights went out. Others just vanished. No one knows where." I shook my head. Vanished. That's impossible. I thought so too, but Mara said something strange just before the power cut. She was whispering with Aunt Diane, and when the lights went off, they disappeared. It's like they planned it. The sinking feeling in my chest grew heavier. I took a few cautious steps forward and entered the dining room. The long mahogany table, usually the centerpiece of family gatherings, looked cold and empty. Only half. The chairs were filled. People sat in small groups, eyes darting nervously, whispering rumors back and forth. My father was at the head of the table, his usual commanding presence replaced by a scowl. Mara was sitting to his right, her arms crossed, face calm, but eyes sharp like knives. I caught her glance as I entered. The smirk was back. "Elias," Dad said without looking up, "I told you to stay out of this. You don't belong here." Stood tall, ignoring his jab. "What's really happening, Dad? Where did everyone go?" He snorted. "They left because this isn't a place for people like them. It's certainly not for you." Before I could reply, Mara interjected. "You see, everyone's scared. Who wants to be stuck? In a house with the other child? No offense, but your reputation precedes you." I clenched my fists but held my ground. This wasn't the time for a fight. I scanned the room. Several guests I recognized were missing. My Uncle Jerry, Aunt Diane, who Henry mentioned, and a few of Dad's business associates. The people left looked tense, eyes shifting nervously as if waiting for the next disaster. One of Dad's oldest friends, Mr. Lawson, stood up suddenly. "This blackout's too convenient," he said, his voice low. "It feels like someone planned this. To shake us up? Maybe to cover something else?" I caught everyone's attention. Even Mara frowned, though. She quickly masked it. I took a breath. Is it possible someone here wanted half the guests gone? Maybe to divide and conquer? A nervous laugh came from the far end of the room, and a younger cousin, Leia, piped up Dad and Mara. It wouldn't surprise me. The room fell quiet. It was clear that under all the smiles and pleasantries, no one truly trusted anyone. Suddenly, the front door slammed shut with a bang. Everyone jumped.
Ow.
My dad's face twisted into something unreadable.
Ow.
"One leaves this house until we figure out what's going on." That was when I realized we were trapped physically and emotionally in this house with a family that thrived on control and manipulation. I decided I needed answers, so I pulled Henry aside. "What exactly happened before the power went out?" I whispered. Henry hesitated. Mara and Aunt Diane were whispering near the study. I overheard bits. Something about making sure he doesn't interfere and the plan is in motion. It sounded like they had something to gain from the guests disappearing. My heart sank. This wasn't random. This was orchestrated. We moved quietly toward the study to see if we could find clues. Inside, the room was cold, and the faint smell of perfume lingered, probably Aunt Diane's. Papers were scattered across the desk, and a half-finished glass of water sat forgotten on the side table. Henry flipped through the papers. "Look at this. It's a list of names and dates. Some of these names are people who left or disappeared tonight." I frowned. Why would Mara and Aunt Diane be keeping tabs on family and guests? "Maybe to decide who stays and who goes," Henry said grimly. We heard footsteps behind us. Turning around, we saw Mara, her expression unreadable. "Curious, aren't you?" "Is," said smoothly. "You should learn your place before poking around where you don't belong." Before I could respond, the lights flickered and went out again. The house was plunged into darkness. Whispers turned to murmurs, then panic. In the dim glow of emergency lights, someone screamed. When the lights finally came back on, another person was missing. The tension was palpable. The family's perfect. Facade was cracking, revealing greed, secrets, and a dangerous willingness to do whatever it took to keep power. And I realized that this Christmas wasn't just about family. It was a battlefield, and I was right in the crosshairs. When the lights snapped back on and the room fell into uneasy silence, the absence of another person hit like a wave. One of Dad's business associates, Mr. Lawson, was nowhere to be seen. The chair beside him was empty, and the room seemed colder, darker somehow. No one spoke. My eyes scanned the room, taking in the pale faces, the stiff postures, the subtle glances, darting toward each other like they were silently accusing someone. The perfect Christmas dinner was unraveling, and the villains in my family were finally showing their true colors. My father cleared his throat, trying to regain some control. "This is unacceptable," he said, in that booming voice he used when he wanted to intimidate. "Whoever is responsible for this will answer to me." Mara gave a tight smile, but there was a hint of something else, satisfaction, maybe. She had been watching the chaos unfold like a cat watching mice scramble. I felt a familiar cold rage building inside me. But instead of lashing out, I kept calm. I realized this was my chance. My chance to finally take control, to stop being the invisible child in the room. I stepped forward and addressed the room. "No one's leaving until we get to the bottom of this. If people are disappearing, it's not because of some random accident. Someone here is behind it." A few heads turned sharply toward me, including Dad's. I met his cold gaze without flinching. "You," he sneered. "You think you can play detective?" Now, I shook my head slowly. "No, I think you all underestimated me. But tonight, I'm done being ignored." Mara rolled her eyes. "Please, what are you going to do? Complain to the rest of us? You're out of your league." But I didn't back down. I pulled out my phone, already connected to emergency services from outside, and started recording. "If anyone leaves this house, I'll have this entire conversation," I said calmly. "And the police will know exactly who tried to cover this up." Suddenly, my mother appeared at the doorway, looking flustered, but quickly composing herself. "Elias, darling, this isn't the time for theatrics." I looked at her, the woman who had silently allowed years of cruelty to flourish. "No, Mom, it's exactly the time." Henry came up beside me and whispered, "People are scared, Elias, but I think they're also scared of Dad and Mara." I nodded. The power plays had gone too far, and I wasn't going to let them win. Over the next hour, the house became a tense holding cell. I moved through the rooms quietly, observing, listening, piecing things together. People who had once smiled politely were now whispering, eyes darting, silently accusing. The charming mask of my family was slipping, revealing manipulation, jealousy, and a willingness to do anything to protect their secrets. That's when I found the first real evidence. In Mara's purse, left carelessly on the couch, was a small device, a remote control for the house's electrical system. My heart pounded. I showed it to Henry. "This explains the power outages." We quietly moved to the study where I confronted Mara. "Care to explain this?" I asked, holding up the device. Her eyes flashed with anger, but she quickly masked it with a cold smile. You're making a mistake, Elias. This isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment you decided to treat me like I didn't belong, I said. Before she could reply, Dad appeared behind her. Enough, he barked. This family has fallen apart because of you. No, I said, stepping between them. Because of you and your games. I pulled out the list of names Henry and I had found earlier, the list of people who'd been targeted that night. This is more than a power outage, I said. You've been controlling who stays and who disappears, who gets to be part of this family and who gets erased. Mara scoffed. That list means nothing, but I wasn't done. I reached into my pocket and pulled out an envelope, the one I'd mailed to my lawyer earlier that day. It contained copies of financial records, emails, and proof of how Dad and Mara had been siphoning money from family trusts, manipulating inheritances, and using threats to keep people in line. This means a lot, I said, holding it up for everyone to see. I'm handing it over to the authorities. The room erupted into chaos. Dad's face turned red with fury. You think you can destroy this family? I'm saving it, I replied, by getting rid of the corruption. Mara laughed bitterly. You're a fool, Elias. You don't know what you're dealing with. I smiled calmly. Maybe, but I know enough to see that the real villains aren't the ones leaving. They're the ones staying behind. That night, the power stayed out longer than anyone expected. The guests who remained shifted uncomfortably, some avoiding my gaze, others whispering behind hands. The tension was thick. The evidence felt utterly surreal, as if I were watching everything happen from outside my own body. The house, once so familiar, had transformed into something foreign, a prison filled with whispers and unspoken fears. The air was thick with tension, so dense you could almost reach out and slice through it like a knife. No one dared speak openly, as if saying the wrong word might cause the entire fragile facade to collapse. The usual polite small talk had evaporated, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed down on everyone's shoulders. Only two people dared to break that silence, Dad and Mara, and their true colors shone brighter than I had ever seen before, unmasked and unapologetic. Dad was pacing back and forth across the grand dining room like a caged lion, his face flushed. With fury and disbelief, he shouted about betrayal and family honor, but his words felt hollow. Echoes of a man more enraged at losing control than genuinely concerned for the family he claimed to protect. His voice, usually so commanding and full of authority, now sounded desperate and brittle, a man clinging to a crumbling empire. Mara, on the other hand, was a study in cold calculation. She withdrew into herself, retreating behind a wall of icy glares and tight-lipped disdain. Yet behind that fierce exterior, I caught a glimpse of something else. Fear. It was the kind of fear that only comes when the game is up, when the illusion of power begins to slip, and the consequences of one's actions come crashing down. I stood there quietly, not expecting apologies or remorse. I wasn't looking for forgiveness. From them, not ever. What I wanted was justice, a reckoning that exposed the years of manipulation, greed, and cruelty that had been hidden behind the polished smiles and carefully maintained appearances. For once, I wanted the truth to shine through, raw and undeniable. That night, sleep was impossible. I barely closed my eyes before dawn crept in, pale and unforgiving. Early the next morning, armed with the damning documents, financial records, and emails I had gathered, I walked into the local authorities' office. The investigation began quietly but swiftly, as the weight of the evidence left no room for delay. What I had collected was more than enough to launch a full inquiry into the family's finances and dealings. What followed was a series of fractures, so deep they severed relationships that could never be repaired. Dad was stripped of control over the family trusts, the legal proceedings revealing financial mismanagement that was both reckless and intentional. Every paper trail pointed to deliberate siphoning of funds and abuse of power. Mara's involvement became glaringly clear through her digital footprints. Emails, messages, and witness statements painted her as a willing accomplice, not just a passive beneficiary. As for the disappearances that had unnerved everyone that night, They were far from mysterious. The guests who vanished were quietly warned off, threatened with exclusion from family affairs or devastating financial repercussions should they speak out. Some left silently, their fear outweighing any hope of confrontation. Others severed ties for good, unwilling to be part of a family that wielded fear and manipulation like weapons. I became the unexpected catalyst for all of this, the sibling whom no one believed would fight back, who had been written off and ignored. But in standing up, I shattered the cycle of silence and control. The aftermath was messy and painful. Family dinners stopped abruptly. Invitations ceased altogether. In the local circles where my family once wielded influence, I was painted as the troublemaker, the villain who tore the family apart. But their attempts at character assassination fell flat. When faced with the cold facts laid out in legal documents and the testimonies of those who'd been silenced for too long, lies held no sway. Dylan, my nephew, found himself caught in the crossfire of all this turmoil. But I made it my mission to ensure he understood the truth about family, that love and respect aren't handed down by default, but earned through kindness, integrity, and honesty. Months have passed since that fateful Christmas, and I now live far from the house that once felt like a gilded cage. The family name I carry no longer burdens me with shame or invisibility. Instead, it reminds me of resilience, strength, and the hard-won truth. Dad and Mara remain trapped in their bitterness and greed, prisoners of the very control and cruelty they once wielded over others. I don't forgive them. Not because I am bitter, but because some wounds run too deep, inflicted by those who chose power over family. They made their choices, and I made mine. To walk away, to break free, and to rebuild my life on my own terms. That Christmas marked a turning point the night I stopped being the forgotten child, the family scapegoat, and started claiming my place in the world. Not by seeking their approval or acceptance, but through my own strength, courage, and determination. To live honestly and freely. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this.